The world stage is constantly shifting, with numerous significant events unfolding globally. Today, we delve into a fascinating geopolitical scenario. The United States and Canada, two vast neighboring nations, share the world's longest undefended border. But imagine if that boundary wasn't quite so fixed. What if specific American states, perhaps disillusioned with the political climate in Washington, or attracted by Canada's perceived stability, decided to break away? It sounds outlandish, doesn't it? We'll explore the conclusions on this later in the video. However, the reality is that several states already possess substantial economic, cultural, and even political connections with Canada. Consider this. What if Vermont, known for its independent spirit, decided to act on that streak and secede? What if Minnesota's distinct northern character felt more aligned with Canada? And Alaska, already geographically separated from the contiguous United States? Some potential shifts might take you by surprise, while for others, the indicators are already present. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. It truly helps us grow and continue bringing you insightful content. Let's dissect these possibilities. What if an entire state already felt a stronger kinship with Canada than with the United States? When you think of this state, images of maple syrup, quaint small towns, and the crisp scent of autumn air might come to mind. But here's the twist. Those very characteristics are precisely why Vermont could potentially be the first to bid farewell to America. This state boasts a long heritage of autonomy, having existed as its own republic before joining the Union in 1791. Please make sure to watch this video until the end, as we will be summarizing our findings and drawing conclusions. Politically, Vermont leans heavily towards progressive policies, mirroring its northern neighbor in many respects. But here's where the situation becomes particularly intriguing. Some residents are already advocating for departure. A movement known as the Second Vermont Republic has been actively campaigning for secession for years, asserting that the state would prosper more independently. Combine this with robust trade connections with Quebec, a mutual appreciation for social programs, and an economy built on industries that harmonize with Canada's, and suddenly, the notion of Vermont splitting off doesn't seem quite so far-fetched. Could this signify America's first genuine secession in centuries? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. You might be astonished to learn that one U.S. state already relies significantly on Canada for its very survival. Without its northern neighbor, it would face immense challenges keeping the power on, literally. That's because Maine imports a substantial portion of its electricity directly from Quebec. Furthermore, its economy flourishes thanks to cross-border commerce. In fact, goods valued at over $3 billion flow between Maine and Canada annually. But guess what? Culturally, Maine often feels more Canadian than American. With its rugged coastline, close-knit fishing communities, and French-speaking populations, it shares more characteristics with New Brunswick than, for instance, Texas. Even politically, Maine's policies frequently align more closely with Canada's approach than with Washington's directives. And let's not overlook history. Maine was once a part of Massachusetts until it separated in 1820. If it could happen once, who's to say it couldn't happen again? What if a state that prides itself on liberty decided to push that principle a step further? Live free or die isn't merely a catchy slogan in New Hampshire. It's deeply ingrained in its identity. New Hampshire has consistently championed independence, characterized by low taxes, a vibrant libertarian movement, and policies that often diverge from the rest of the U.S. But imagine if that independence propelled it away from America entirely. This isn't just abstract speculation. That's because New Hampshire is among the most fiercely independent states in the nation. And consider this. Some of its residents are already discussing secession. This isn't some fringe theory. In 2022, a group of lawmakers actually introduced an amendment to the state constitution that would have placed secession on the ballot. Although it didn't pass, the mere fact that it was formally debated in the legislature is significant. That's monumental. New Hampshire has always carved its own path. No income tax, no sales tax, and a live free or die ethos that sometimes resonates more with Canada's decentralized governance than Washington's federal oversight. But here's where it gets even more compelling. New Hampshire's economy is already deeply intertwined with Canada. Trade worth over $8 billion flows between the two annually, and numerous businesses within the state depend on Canadian partnerships for their viability. Culturally, too, New Hampshire shares more common ground with its northern neighbor than with states like California or Florida. It's a small, rural state with a passion for the outdoors, winter sports, and a potent regional identity. And don't forget, New Hampshire has previously been a focal point for political movements. The Free State Project, encouraging libertarians to relocate to New Hampshire and advocate for limited government, has already made significant inroads. But what if the subsequent step involved not just resisting federal policies, but departing the U.S. altogether? It might appear extreme, but in a state where independence is a fundamental way of life, anything seems possible. You might be taken aback to realize that one U.S. state is already so interconnected with Canada that leaving America might actually be a logical step. It possesses profound economic links, a shared cultural identity, and a populace that, believe it or not, is sometimes mistaken for being Canadian. That state? Minnesota. Let's examine this more closely. Minnesota shares a border stretching nearly 550 miles with Canada, and its largest trading partner is, unsurprisingly, Canada. In 2023 alone, Minnesota exported goods worth over $7 billion across that border, establishing Canada as an economic lifeline for the state. But the connection isn't solely about monetary exchange. Minnesota and Canada exhibit similar lifestyles. The people are known for being friendly, enjoying the outdoors, and are recognized for their distinct accents and passion for hockey. The climate? Brutally cold, much like Canada's. And the political landscape often aligns more with progressive Canadian policies than with conservative American ones. Interestingly, there's historical context here. Before Minnesota officially achieved statehood in 1858, portions of it were governed by the British. Its early fur trade industry was heavily tied to Canada. Even presently, many Minnesotans possess dual citizenship or maintain close family relationships with Canadians just across the border. But here's where the situation becomes thought-provoking. Some analysts suggest that if the U.S. were ever to experience significant political instability or economic downturn, Minnesota would be among the first states to seriously explore alternative arrangements. Given its deep-rooted connections to Canada, it wouldn't be entirely unexpected if some residents began looking northward instead of eastward for their future. What if a state came to the realization that it was more reliant on a foreign nation than its own country? Imagine being so economically bound to another nation that secession actually seemed rational. It sounds utterly illogical until you consider that North Dakota is effectively in that very position. This state might appear to be a tranquil, often overlooked part of America, but its economy is practically fused with Canada's. Here's where the details get wild. North Dakota exports more goods to Canada than to any other country, a staggering $6 billion annually. And this dependence isn't limited to trade. Regarding energy, Canada provides a massive share of the state's power. In agriculture, North Dakota farmers rely heavily on Canadian buyers to sustain their operations. Even travel is deeply integrated. A surprising number of residents frequently cross the border for healthcare, shopping, and employment. In some border towns, spotting a Canadian license plate is as common as seeing an American one. Now, let's touch upon politics. North Dakota's small government, pro-business stance, and strong trade relationships actually align more closely with Canada's western provinces, particularly Alberta, than with Washington, D.C. And here's an intriguing historical tidbit. At one point, there were serious discussions about North Dakota and Manitoba merging into a unified economic zone. While it never materialized, the concept hasn't entirely vanished. So, what might occur if the U.S. faced a future political or economic crisis? North Dakota is already profoundly dependent on Canada. Could it one day decide to formalize this connection? It sounds shocking, but when a state's economic lifeline is a foreign country, the question arises, Why maintain loyalty to a system that barely seems to notice you? What if a state shared more commonalities with Canada than with the rest of the United States? Consider Montana. What if its rugged, independent character led it to question whether remaining part of America was the optimal path? That is precisely the situation unfolding in Montana. Here's the reality. Montana already functions much like a Canadian province in many ways. It shares a 545-mile border with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. But here's the crucial point. These provinces aren't merely neighbors. They are vital economic collaborators. In 2023, Montana exported goods worth over $700 million to Canada, making Canada one of the state's most significant trading partners. Culturally, the people of Montana live and breathe the outdoors, just like their Canadian counterparts. Whether it's ranching, hunting, or enduring harsh winters, Montana and Canada are practically twins in these aspects. But guess what? There's historical precedent for Montana being more connected to Canada than the U.S. Back in the 1800s, before it officially became a state, a significant portion of Montana's fur trade was dominated by Canadian companies. Even today, numerous Montanans hold dual citizenship or have close family ties across the border. Some even jest that Alberta and Montana are essentially the same place, except one offers universal health care. And here's the element often overlooked. Montana is home to a strong anti-federal government sentiment. Many Montanans feel Washington ignores their needs, and some would prefer a system more aligned with their values and economy. If circumstances ever became sufficiently dire, who's to say Montana wouldn't look north instead of east for its future? Why does this state seem more linked to its northern neighbor than to the rest of the U.S.? Why are its major cities already financially, politically, and culturally intertwined with another nation? That state is Washington. Washington isn't just geographically close to Canada. It's deeply connected in ways that might make you ponder where its future truly lies. Could a shift be more probable than most people assume? The answer might surprise you. Let's examine the numbers. Who is Washington's #1 trading partner? Canada. In 2023 alone, goods valued at over $20 billion moved between the two. That's not insignificant pocket change. It represents a substantial economic reliance, and it extends beyond mere trade. Washington depends on Canadian energy, with vast amounts of hydroelectric power flowing south from British Columbia. Even its largest port, Seattle, is intricately linked to Canadian shipping routes, facilitating the movement of millions of dollars worth of goods between Asia and North America. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Washington isn't just financially tied to Canada, it's politically aligned as well. It stands as one of the most progressive states in the U.S., with policies concerning healthcare, environmental protection, and social services that often appear more Canadian than American. Washington has also actively pursued closer ties with British Columbia, including proposals for high-speed rail aimed at connecting Seattle and Vancouver in under 2 hours. Some politicians have even explored the idea of deeper economic integration. And guess what? The cultural overlap is undeniable. From Vancouver to Seattle, people share the same outdoor lifestyle, a tech-driven economy, and a love for coffee. In fact, many British Columbians live and work in Washington while still considering Canada home. If the U.S. were ever to face a major political division, it wouldn't be entirely surprising if Washington began contemplating its options and looking northward rather than eastward. How does a state even maintain its American identity when it's physically detached from the rest of the nation? How does it stay connected when its economy, military presence, and daily life are more interwoven with another country? That state is Alaska. Alaska might represent America's last frontier, but look more closely, and you'll discern just how profoundly tied it is to Canada. Could it ever decide to separate? The indicators might astonish you. Let's begin with geography. Alaska is situated closer to Canada than to the U.S. mainland, by a considerable distance. In fact, the sole method of driving from Alaska to the contiguous United States involves traveling through Canada. And the connections aren't merely about location. This state is deeply linked to Canada's economy, with billions of dollars flowing between them in oil, seafood, and raw materials. Some of Alaska's largest fishing operations depend on Canadian waters, and Canadian companies hold substantial stakes in Alaska's natural resource industries. But here's where the situation takes a truly interesting turn. Alaska was actually once part of Russia. While that history might seem irrelevant, it underscores a crucial point. Alaska hasn't always been American. If the U.S. were ever to experience major political upheaval, would Alaska choose to forge its own path? Or would it look towards the north, where its economy already possesses deep roots? And consider this. The military presence in Alaska is another immense factor. The state hosts some of the most strategically vital U.S. bases. However, Canada already plays a significant role in joint defense initiatives. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, integrates Alaskan and Canadian forces, implying that in the scenario of a major geopolitical shift, Alaska and Canada would likely collaborate before involving others. So, if a time ever arrives when the U.S. no longer feels like the appropriate home for Alaska, don't be surprised if this state evaluates its alternatives. Because when you're already functioning like an independent entity, making it official isn't such a radical notion. You'd be shocked by how connected this state is to Canada. So much so that it almost feels like a part of it already. That state is Michigan. Michigan relies on Canada more than any other U.S. state, with trade amounting to $80 billion flowing across the border annually. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is one of the busiest trade routes in North America, with thousands of trucks making the crossing daily. If that critical link were ever severed, Michigan's economy could face an overnight collapse. And guess what? The automotive industry, Michigan's economic backbone, is heavily reliant on Canada. Factories in Detroit and Windsor are so intertwined that some vehicles are assembled using parts manufactured in both nations. If you've ever driven a Ford, Chevy, or Chrysler, there's a strong possibility it was built with Canadian labor or components. But the ties extend beyond just money. Michigan and Canada share crucial infrastructure, including bridges, tunnels, and power grids. The state depends on Canadian electricity, and the Ambassador Bridge, the busiest border crossing between the two countries, is owned by a Canadian billionaire. And here's a surprising historical fact. Michigan once considered merging with Canada. Back in the 1800s, following the Toledo War, some Michiganders actually preferred joining Canada over remaining with the U.S. While that merger didn't happen, the underlying sentiment hasn't entirely disappeared. Given its deep economic, energy, and even historical ties to Canada, could Michigan one day reconsider its position within the U.S.? It sounds extreme, until you realize it's already operating much like a Canadian province in many respects. So, could these states realistically break away and become part of Canada? Initially, the idea seems purely speculative. Yet, when examining the evidence, the deep economic dependencies, the shared cultural values, the political alignments, and even historical precedents, the connections are strikingly clear. From economies reliant on Canadian trade and energy to cultural similarities and political viewpoints that often mirror their northern neighbor, these states are already closer to Canada than many realize. History demonstrates that borders are not immutable, nations evolve, and circumstances change. What appears impossible today could potentially become tomorrow's reality. What are your thoughts? Could any of these states genuinely leave the U.S. and join Canada? Share your perspective in the comments below. And please remember to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support helps our channel continue delivering thought-provoking content like this. Thank you for watching until the end and exploring these possibilities with us. Until next time.